This is Thanks, James by Greydar. Read to you by Lala's Podfics. Summary. Potter, leave me alone, she stated flatly. Most of the time, she tried her absolute hardest to just ignore him. But today, it was just not the day for his crap. I will if you promise to go out with me, he countered smugly. And okay, Lily knows that lasting only a couple of minutes was pretty unimpressive, but she just couldn't hold it in anymore. Why on earth are you still wasting your time on this? Or the one where Lily is having a really bad day and having to deal with Potter's cruel asking her out as a joke is not on her agenda. But little does she know, it's not a joke. Just a couple warnings. Lily is really insecure about her body and looks in this and is having a bad day in general, so she's a bit harsh on herself. Chapter 1. You know when you wake up in the morning and you just know that today is going to be absolute shit? The pounding in your head and the empty nausea in your stomach hits you like a truck the moment you come back to consciousness. The uncontrollable urge to just stay in bed all day and cry until you can't breathe is all you can think about as your alarm blares at you from seemingly every direction. That's how Lily knew that today was certainly not going to be a good day. The groans and shouts from the other girls in the dorms prompted her to reach over and put an end to the terrible beep, beep, beep that traumatized their eardrums every school morning at 7 a.m. sharp. Normally, Lily got up almost right away to start getting ready for the day. Being a naturally early riser did have its perks, but today she laid in bed and stared at the ceiling. The sound of Mary's shower running and Marlene dragging a half-asleep, groaning Dorcas out of bed filled the room as they did every morning, but Lily just ignored them. In fact, she continued to ignore the sounds that filled the room even as they changed to the calling of her name from outside the curtains around her bed. In Lily's defense, the ceiling pattern was quite distracting. The swoosh of the curtains opening slightly was what brought her out of her daze, and she cast her eyes downward to find Marlene standing at the end of her bed. The blonde's face held a knowing look that she tried to hide with a soft smile. When Lily sat up and tucked in her legs, knowing that Marlene would make her move soon anyway, the blonde crawled into bed and sat opposite the redhead. Did anything happen, or is it just, she asked until Lily cut her off, just a bad day? You know me too well, Marlene chuckled. Want us to bring you up breakfast? Lily shook her head with a mumbled, not hungry. I'll meet you in the common room when you're done eating. Marlene opened her mouth to say something, but decidedly ignored her thought. Instead, she slid off the bed and said, Okay, we'll meet you there, before stepping out of the curtains and closing it behind her. Lily waited until she heard the door open and close before sluggishly crawling out of bed. She grabbed her uniform that sat folded neatly on the nightstand from placing it there the night before and slipped into it. Her gaze stayed forward, not allowing herself to look down at her body, even as she slipped through the curtains and dragged herself to the bathroom. Lily and the mirror had an on-again, off-again relationship, one that hadn't been in the on phase since she was 9. Now, being 16, she was used to looking at her chubby cheeks and hooded eyes, but that still didn't make it any easier. She tried her best to ignore the reflection as she brushed her teeth and hair, but makeup was something that just couldn't be done without it. She only wore the basics on most days, mascara, concealer, and maybe some highlighter, but today she couldn't even finish curling her lashes with her eyes filling with tears of disgust from just looking at the face she was stuck with. The makeup would be a no-show today, but Lily couldn't really bring herself to care, as she threw her bag, packed with everything she needed for the day, over her shoulder. She took a deep breath, preparing herself for the ultimate shit show of a day that was about to happen, before stepping out of the dorms and down the stairs. Waiting for her on the couch was Marlene, Mary, and Dorcas, who stood almost immediately and started towards her when she came into view. Marlene was holding a plate of food in front of Lily now, but the redhead just stared down at it. Did she always eat that much in the morning? Did Marlene assume that even though Lily had said she wasn't hungry, there was no way someone like her, that's someone fat, could go a morning without food? Lily didn't know how long she'd been staring at the plate for or what happened after, but when she came back to the world, she was now sat in her usual spot in Transfiguration between Marlene and Mary as Professor McGonagall spewed on about nonverbal spells. Evans! What a marvelous surprise! No, Lily was not in the mood for this today. Her legs kept moving her forward. She was mentally exhausted, even though it was only just after lunch, but at the same time was determined not to have to deal with James Potter and his immature old jokes. His bullying was easy to ignore in the beginning, back when they were in first year. Lily had been experiencing the same thing for as long as she could remember, so it wasn't a surprise when the popular, funny, not sexy, athlete chose her as his aim to humiliate. It's what got him his laughs, ask out the fat, nerdy ginger for some sort of spite thing. But after this long, when they were now 15 years old, and the only people who threw even a chuckle were the other 75% of his little play group, it would be assumed that he would just drop it, that he would give it up already and leave her the hell alone. Being suddenly faced with the wide smirk and wide brown eyes behind glasses standing right in front of her was enough to let Lily know simply ignoring the problem would not be what worked today. She stopped walking so as to not bump into him when what he was saying started to register again. Are looking absolutely stunning today, like always. Any chance you fancy a Potter, leave me alone, she stated flatly. Most of the time she tried her absolute hardest to just ignore him, but today, it was just not the day for his crap. I will if you promise to go out with me, he countered smugly. And okay, Lily knows that lasting only a couple of minutes was pretty unimpressive, but she just couldn't hold it in anymore. Why on earth are you still wasting your time on this? For once, that stupid smirk on his face turned into a look of shock at her outburst. He sputtered slightly before regaining himself and saying, "Because you haven't said yes yet, obviously. Do you actually think I'm stupid enough to agree to your little joke? Have you not gotten enough laughs already? Yes, I, James Potter, will make the fat, ugly nerd think I would go out with her just so I can turn her down when she says yes. So very funny, Potter. You'd think when your audience has shrunk to your three little minions, you being 16, an age when most guys' balls have dropped, and you've become a little more mature, that you would have realized it's not fucking funny, and it never was." And it was quiet. It was quiet enough for Lily to realize that the boy in front of her was now staring at her, eyes wide and lips parted in complete and utter confusion and shock. Quiet enough for Lily to realize that her yelling had turned into crying. No, it had turned into literal sobbing. Quiet enough for Lily to realize that even though the corridor held only the four loudest boys in the school, who were all gaping at her, the only sound that could be heard were her choked-off sobs. Lily could feel her body backing away slightly, without her knowledge, but she eagerly agreed and started to turn away from the scene. Tears still streamed down her face, but just as her body had reached the opposite direction, James fucking Potter was standing in front of her once again. Lily, what are you talking about? What's wrong? Lily realized then that scoffing did not sound as dominating when you were insistently crying your eyes out. It's not a joke, Evan. Lily, I don't... How could you think it was a joke this whole time? The hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The silence only interrupted by the small sniffles coming from the redhead. Lily shrugged lightly when she realized she had yet to answer his question. Obviously it's a joke. You don't have to lie to try not to hurt my feelings. Her gaze moved up. Just drop it, okay? Lily, it was never a joke. I've liked you forever. Why would I joke about wanting to go on a date with you? James questioned softly. He looked confused, and when Lily really focused, he looked kind of hurt. Lily didn't care at this point. Are you stupid, Potter? Look at you, and then look at me. You with your messy hair and your stupid charming smile and your fucking Quidditch body. You're practically perfect. And then me. Fucking look at me. Tears streamed down her face ever more now, and Lily didn't think she'd ever been this embarrassed in her life. Just seconds before she made the conscious decision to walk away, the boy in front of her spoke. I look at you every single day, Lily. You're the most beautiful girl I've literally ever seen in my life, other than my mom, of course. But you come in a very, very close second. In fact, you're almost tied with her, he rambled before stopping and taking a deep breath. That's not the point, okay? You are unbelievably gorgeous. Why on earth would you think that you're not? It was quiet again, but this time, James looked at her with a soft, loving expression, and he didn't look away. I really don't need your pity, she whispered sadly, but was cut off. This is not pity, Lily Evans. You are beyond anything I deserve in a woman, but I'm still never going to give up. I will marry you. Now, unfortunately, that day will not be today, but instead I'm going to walk you to your dorm so you can think about some stuff, okay? His hand was held out. It was right there. And no matter how much Lily told herself not to go with him, her hand somehow found his. And after he led her the longest way around the castle he could, talking to her the entire time about random things while continuously complimenting her, they reached the Gryffindor common room and eventually Lily's dorm room. Lily didn't know what to say, but as she crossed the line that held the boys back from the girls' dorms, she mumbled a quiet, "Thanks, James." Even though he didn't answer, she knew he heard her. The end. Thanks again to Greydar for letting me record this. Please go to archiveofourown.org/works/328-12864 to leave comments and kudos for the original author. Reader's notes. This is the very first podfic I ever made. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Just one important note, though, I do not support any of J.K. Rowling's transphobia, and I hope you enjoy this alternative content instead of supporting her. Have a great day.